So let's continue the discussion about flexible or floating exchange rates. And recall that that means that the government isn't intervening in the foreign exchange markets to affect the exchange rates. Instead, the exchange rates are determined by the private supply and private demand, in this example for pounds. Two bits of terminology that we'll use very frequently and that you'll see in the press a lot is an appreciation or depreciation of, say, the pound. And that has a very particular meaning. It is a reflection of changing market conditions in this flexible exchange rate. When we talk about fixed exchange rates, we will talk about a revaluation or a devaluation of the currency, which is a change in the value as a response to government actions. This is a response to market conditions. So again, we're going to be talking about this in the context of the foreign exchange market between dollars and pounds, which is the example that we've been using. So an appreciation of the pound would be an exchange rate say going from taking $1.50 to buy a pound, so $1.50 per pound, compared to $1.80 per pound. In the second condition, you have more dollars that are required to buy a pound. So the value of the pound has risen. Now, I would encourage you not to talk about the exchange rate going up or down, but instead talking about the value of a particular currency going up or down, or even better, to say an appreciation or depreciation. So an example of a depreciation of the pound would be, for example, going from taking $1.50 to buy a pound to taking only $1 to buy a pound. So now the value of the pound has fallen in the foreign exchange market. Okay, so here's some examples of this, but I want to do this in terms of a graph because we'll be using this mechanism a number of times. So here we start with the private supply of pounds, the private demand for pounds, and an equilibrium exchange rate of $1.50. So that's where the demand and supply of this currency equals each other. So let's say that you have an increase in the demand for pounds for some reason. That could be because of changing tastes in the United States. It could be for British goods. It could be because British assets are suddenly more attractive. It could be a number of reasons. But let's just focus on the mechanism. So an increase in the demand for pounds would be a shift out in the demand curve for pounds, and very similar to what we would have in a standard supply and demand curve graph. At the initial price, at this initial exchange rate of $1.50 per pound, what you have is more demand for pounds than you have supply. This increase in the demand for pounds at the current exchange rate results in an excess demand for private pounds. So when I say private, that means by private citizens. So what you have here is this disequilibrium. If you were looking at this in terms of the balance of payments, you would have a temporary balance of a UK balance of payments surplus. So what has to happen because this balance of payments surplus doesn't continue because the central bank doesn't intervene, is that the exchange rate changes. You would have a new exchange rate, say $1.80 per pound. I'm pulling that number out of the air, but it's something bigger than 1.5, where the demand and supply are equal. So what you have here is pressure for the price of pounds to rise, a pound appreciation. Now you could also think of this from the dollar standpoint, that it would be a dollar depreciation, because the increase in the demand for pounds, as we've talked about before, is another way of saying that there's an increase in the supply of dollars in the foreign exchange market. So anything that increases the demand for pounds is going to tend to cause a pound appreciation, or equivalently a dollar depreciation when we look at it in terms of this market. So that's an example where you have an appreciation of the currency. Let's look at a depreciation of the pound. Okay, so very similar setup. We'll start with the same initial exchange rate. And it shouldn't surprise you that this depreciation of the pound would be associated with an increase in the supply of pounds by British citizens who want to buy American stuff. And that increase in the supply of private pounds shifts that supply curve out. And similar to what we had before, at the initial exchange rate, you've got an excess supply of pounds in the foreign exchange market, which is a temporary UK balance of payments deficit. So you'll often have situations with flexible exchange rates where there's an increase, say, in supply of the domestic currency in the foreign exchange market, putting downward pressure on the exchange rate, a temporary balance of payments deficit, which is rectified by a change in the exchange rate. For example, coming down to a new exchange rate of, say, $1 per pound. Again, that number is taken out of the air, but you have the market operating to change the exchange rate and eliminate this balance of payments deficit. You have this self-correcting mechanism by which the exchange rate moves to deal with the changes in the underlying supply or demands of the currency. So we could also do this from the standpoint of dollars, the supply and demand for dollars, but the basic mechanism would be the same. Okay, so this is a very important graph, very important set of definitions about terminology that we'll be using. And let me remind you once again, appreciation and depreciation will refer to responses to changes in the private marketplace, not as a result of direct government intervention into the foreign exchange market. All right, thank you very much.